All right, well, I'm recording. Thanks very much for joining us. And we're very lucky tonight. We've got Dr. Anthony Marinac with us, who's going to take us through looking up the law, particularly, well, he's got a couple of topics in mind. He's going to take us through statutes and case law and hopefully give us some good tips on how to use the resources we have. By now, most of you are aware that we don't have the full suite. So this could be very useful for us. I'll hand over to Dr. Marinac.
Thanks, Wayne. Good day, everyone. I think looking up at the screen, I know a fair few of you, but not all of you. So either you've been avoiding me or we just haven't had the pleasure yet. So one way or another, we'll probably get to know one another eventually. What I'm going to do tonight, we're going to go through either 3 or 4 short lectures of about half an hour each. There's 4 topics, but I may end up combining the last 2. So we'll start by talking about statute and then spend half an hour on case law. And then the final 2 topics are encyclopedias and journals. In a moment, I'm going to share screen and we'll spend most of the half hour in share screen mode so that you can see what's going on the screen, because looking at my face is not particularly helpful compared to looking at what you can see on screen. What that also means, though, is that I'm unlikely to see the chat window until the end. So if you have particular questions, the best thing to do may be to hang on to those until we get to the end. So presuming that I can make the technology work, I'm going to share the screen now. All right, now, Jamie, I can see you, Jamie Roberts. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the Firefox there, mate? Excellent, thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to minimise away all your smiling faces. Now, the first section we're going to talk about is finding statute. And we'll start with some of the obvious stuff on OSLI, but I'll teach you a few tricks. And then we'll move through to a few websites that you may not have come across previously. And we're going to be looking at both Commonwealth law and Queensland law. So we'll start with OSLI. I'm going to go ahead and believe that all of you are familiar with OSLI already, because it's probably the first database that most students come across once you study law. If you haven't come across it yet, this is a free online repository of an immense, absolutely immense amount of statute, case law and journal material. And when I say free, I mean absolutely free. They ask for contributions, but you can use the thing to your heart's content without ever paying a cent. Finding Commonwealth legislation is very easy. From the main OSLI screen, click on Commonwealth, scroll down just a little bit, and you will see that you've got a number of dot points. Now, Consolidated Acts is usually the one that you want. Commonwealth Consolidated Acts will give you the Act as it is in operation now. So that means if there have been amendments to the legislation, those amendments are going to be incorporated. If you're looking for material from a while ago, you may find it either in the Commonwealth Repealed Acts, or you may need to go and look at what they call the Commonwealth Numbered Acts. Let's have a quick look at those. The numbered acts, instead of being listed by their name, they're usually listed by the year and the number. So if we click on 2016, you can see that these are the acts that have been passed in 2016 in the Commonwealth Parliament, and they're listed in the order in which they were given royal assent. And so what that means is that if you need to find out what the Parliament passed about, say, environment law in 2010, then you can log on to, or you click onto 2010, which we'll do right now, and then you can just simply do a Control F or a Command F if you're a Mac person, search on the word environment, and you can see that it brings up straight away that there's 2 pieces of legislation mentioning the environment. Number 23, the Antarctic Treaty Environment Protection Amendment Act, And then further down, the EPBC Amendment, Recreational Fishing for Mako and Poor Beagle Sharks Act. So if you're looking to find out specifically what the Parliament did in a year, that's where you should be looking. Most of the time, though, 99% of the time, you're going to go in here into Commonwealth Consolidated Acts. Now, for this first half hour, we're going to concentrate on environment law. The main piece of legislation in the Commonwealth is the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999. So you can see we clicked on E, and it's just a straight out alphabetic listing. Open the legislation up and you come to what we call the table page. The table page gives you every section listed separately and listed in order. And you can see over on the left, each section number is a link. So you open up the link and that takes you to the wording of the section. So what we're going to have a look at is, if we look at, okay, what's called a controlled action, section 67. Now, when we open up this section, we have the heading title, what is a controlled action? And then you can see that we get the text of the statutory provision. And we also get links within the text, which will take us to sections that this section refers to. So if you want to go and have a look at that section 25, capital A, then you can click on it, it takes you straight to it, which is kind of handy. More importantly though, and a link that people just often don't see or don't use, is this note up link at the top. Now, the note up link, for those of you who've never heard about noting up before, basically, as you know, when the Parliament passes a piece of statute, it doesn't sit there in that condition forever. What happens is that courts will come along and they'll interpret the statute, and they'll make decisions in which they say this is what we think that bit of the statute means. And so in order to understand the section, you've also got to go and have a look at that case law. If you click note up, what it does is it runs a search through the entire OSLI database on that section. And so it will deliver to you, eventually, it will deliver to you every case and every journal article on the entire database that mentions that section. So as you can see here, there's a bunch of cases. Let's click on the Humane Society International and the Minister for Environment and Heritage. Now, looking at this, it tells us it's a 2003 case heard as number 64 in the Federal Court of Australia in 2003. We click on that and it gives us the entire case. So what this means is if you're doing a subject that's fairly heavy on statute and you're looking at a particular section of the statute for that subject, in order to understand that section, you're going to have to do more than just read the section. You're going to have to click note up and have a look at the key cases that surround that section. Now, how are you going to tell what are the key cases? Well, you're going to tell that by listening to the case law lecture that I'll do in about half an hour's time. For now, just understand that by clicking note up, you can get from that legislation page straight through to the relevant case law. Now, just to show that you can do it, we'll go back to the main OSLI page and click the link through to Queensland. If we go down slightly within Queensland, you can see that we get the same Queensland Consolidated Acts. You've also got numbered acts. Unless you're a historian, I wouldn't worry about the historical acts, but they're all there as well. So they're acts that were consolidated during periods prior to 1951. Pretty unusual, pretty unlikely now, though, that you're going to need, in the course of practice, to look at legislation from earlier than 51. Or if you are, it'll be legislation that has been updated and is still available. So to stick with our environmental theme, we can click Queensland Consolidated Acts, jump into E for Environment, and there's the Environment Protection Act 1994. Again, it brings us to the table. Again, we can click just randomly on any section. Again, we can note it up, and we find that there has been at least one case on that section. Click open the case, and there's the text of that case. So you can see AustLII itself is immensely powerful, particularly given that it's available to you for free, and you can also search it with Google, which is kind of cheating, but I do it from time to time, and it's a good way to jump in without having to use AustLII's own search engine. Now, I'm just thinking about whether I can open up the chat and see whether there's been any questions about AustLII, but not really. So, look, I'm going to go back to plan A, and I'll just ask if there's questions at the end. So that's AustLII. Let's move on from AustLII. The next website I want to tell you about is also freely available on the internet, so you don't need to log into your CQUuni account to get to this website, which is the Federal Register of Legislation website. It's at www.legislation.gov.au. Now, once upon a time, this was a database called Scale Plus, and Scale Plus finished in 2005, and it was replaced by a really dodgy and awful website called ComLaw, and everybody hated ComLaw, and everybody stopped using it because it was a badly operated database, and so everyone went to AustLII instead. They've now gotten rid of ComLaw, and they've got the Federal Register of Legislation, which is, in fact, a really good database and usually works quite quickly. Now, this is obviously for Commonwealth legislation only. We're going to go and have a look at the EPBC Act again, the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. So we start by clicking Acts, and then we're looking for Acts in Force. You can see that it brings us to a alphabetical selection screen over here. So EN for environment. And it gives us all of the acts that are currently in force that start with the letter EN. Okay, so this is the one that we're looking for here, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 99. Now, if you click download, it will download, it will give you the option to download the entire piece of legislation as a PDF document. You can also download it as a Word doc or as a zip file. It's a huge piece of legislation. You can see that downloading it in two parts, you're talking about nearly 9 meg worth of data. So I don't really recommend that, but you can do it if you like. The difficulty with downloading these in PDFs is that if you compare them to AustLII, AustLII will let you go from that table screen, click on the link, and you're straight into the particular section that you want. If you're looking at it as a PDF, then sometimes the table of contents in the PDF can be quite dodgy, and most of the time you're going to end up having to scroll down through X hundred pages to try and find the section that you're after. So why would you bother using this website? Well, for a couple of reasons. One is that none of you wants to be a student forever. Many of you want to be practitioners eventually, and when you go into court, AustLII is not acceptable. Okay, when you go into court and you're going to hand up to the judge a copy of the sections of legislation that you say the judge should be looking at, they'll expect it to be what they call the official print. Now, when you download the PDF off this website, you're downloading the official print. So you're downloading something that you can then hand up to the court. The other thing that's kind of cool, though, about this one is that once you've got to the page with the act that you're after, you click on this link here that says View Series, and then twiddle your thumbs waiting for it to come up. And it gives you a whole bunch of stuff, okay? So you can see that there's 4 tabs here: compilation, principle and amendments, enables, and related bills. Most important one I want you to go to is enables. If you click on that one, what it gives you is all of the regulations, okay, regulations, determinations, rules and codes that are that receive their power from the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. So the way that it works, for those of you not terribly familiar with legislation, is that the Principal Act then authorises a series of regulations that can be made by the Minister to sort of bring the Act to life and to provide the administrative background that will enable the public service to go and actually implement the Act. And so sometimes when you're reading the Act, you have to read those regulations along with it. Now, when you go to the Federal Register of Legislation, you don't have to go searching around like you do in OSLI to find all of those regulations that sit under a particular statute. Okay, you just click that one button, that enables button, and you can get them. And for a big piece of legislation like this, look at the number. There's 858 of those subordinate documents. Now, that means that if you just look at that Act and you don't click through and work out what's going on in these regulations, there's 858 potentially relevant documents that you're not reading. Okay? Let me tell you from a lecturer's perspective, if I'm asking students to interpret a piece of statute and there's a relevant regulation and the student's done their research and comes up with it, you're straight away pitching that student towards at least distinction territory, because you've acted like a practitioner and actually dug in and found the things that are in there. And it's really, really easy because the Federal Register of Legislation lets you do it. Queensland has a very similar website. This one's at www.legislation.qld.gov.au. So there's no tricky bits about how to find this website. Now, if we click on current legislation within Queensland, track down through the letters, we find the Environment Protection Act in Queensland. Eventually, there we are. Now, if we open this up, it will download a court-ready version of that Act. Okay, so you can see here, I won't open it up, but you can see there's a PDF that's ready to go. More importantly, though, you can open up, you click on the one that looks like a little written page, and what it will give you is what we call the historical versions of that Act. So this is a list of every piece of legislation that has amended the Environment Protection Act since it came in 1999. Why is this important? Well, look at how close in dates some of these are. 1st of October 2014, 7th of November 2014, 12th of December 2014, 1st of January 2015. Now, what this means is if your client, whether it's in an assignment or whether it's a real client, if your client's been charged on the 17th of December 2014, then you don't want to be reading this version here that was amended on the 2nd of July 2015 or the one on the 10th of July 2015, because for all you know, the section that your client could be relying on might have been changed since the time that they were charged. So you go back in these historical dates and say, okay, if we're talking about sometime in December 2014, then this version of the Act is going to be relevant. So you download it, and then you've got yourself a PDF of that Act. And if we open it up, it will say current as at the 12th of December 2014. Okay? Immensely important, because you don't want to be that person who ends up embarrassed in front of the judge when it turns out that the section that you're trying to tell the court to rely on was repealed or had not been put in by the time at the time that the charges were made. Now, the Queensland Legislation website also gives you the opportunity to look at what they call subordinate legislation, which is those regulations and everything that we were looking at. Although there's a better way to do it than that. If we go back to our alphabetical listing and go back down to the Environment Protection Act, what you can see is here are the regulations that fall under that Act. So the Environment Protection Regulation, which is the key set of regulations under that Act, we can download straight away. Okay, so you can see that the relevant regulations, policies, determinations, all of that sort of stuff are tucked neatly under that. So again, this is something that AustLII won't do for you. And particularly as you get into the more advanced and statute-heavy subjects, you're going to find that you're going to need to be dealing with the principal statute and the regulations at the same time. And these two sites make that much easier. Now, next thing I want to do, we're still totally within the free websites, okay? So we still haven't even logged on to CQUni's databases as yet. Next one you want to have a look at is the Parliament House website, www.aph.gov.au. And if you're feeling like being a bit of a fanboy or a bit of a fangirl, when you're on here, you can Google me and see some of the parliamentary stuff that I was involved in when I worked down there. But we're not going to do that today because I'm nowhere near that big of a show-off. What we are going to do is go down here, and you can see just above this scrolling news picture, you can see a really innocuous little link that you might otherwise miss that says bills. It's really tiny, which is crazy because it's incredibly important. When we go to bills, it gives you a list that is just about meaningless, that tells you what the most recent bills were that were put before the Parliament. Ignore that. What we want to do is go further down and click more search options. And then search all bills. That gives you the option to then fill in a search tool. If we said, let's say environment, we're only going to search on the titles, and we're looking for something from, say, the 43rd Parliament, which ran 2010 to 2013. We have to unclick current bills because none of the current bills are going to be from that Parliament. We click instead previous bills. Now you can see that I've clicked both royal assent and not passed. What that means is that we're going to look at bills that did pass, that received royal assent, and bills that didn't pass, okay? Click on search. And unless something terrible happens, we should come up with some hits. There we go. So we have 23 hits. Now, we're going to start... well, this one looks pretty cool. Environment Protection Beverage Container Deposit and Recovery Scheme 2010. Now, why have I brought you to this? You can see down the bottom here, there's two links, the bill and the explanatory memorandum. Every piece of legislation that goes through the Commonwealth Parliament has an explanatory memorandum. Now, those of you who've done statutory interpretation in first year and who were paying attention will know that when we interpret legislation in Australia, we use what's called the purposive method, okay? And that's set out in the Acts Interpretation Act. And what that says is you read the Act having in mind the purpose for which the Act was passed. Now, the Acts Interpretation Act also says there's a few ways that you can prove to the court what that purpose was. And one of those is to look to extrinsic materials, which include things like the explanatory memorandum. Now, in order to do that, you've got to be able to find it, and here's where they are. Okay, so you go through and you find that bill when it was first passed through the Commonwealth Parliament, and that will give you the explanatory memorandum. Some of you are saying, well, what the hell is an explanatory memorandum anyway, right? Well, explanatory memorandum is a plain English version of the bill. Let's open this one up in PDF. Let's try and open it up in PDF. Okay, there's something dodgy with the file name, so let's just scroll down instead. What you can see is that here is a short, plain English, non-drafted, normal language explanation of every single clause of the bill. That means that any time that you're dealing with Commonwealth legislation, any time, if you're finding it hard to understand what that section means, you can jump on the Parliament House website, download the explanatory memorandum, and let the people who wrote that legislation tell you what they were on about in plain English. This is incredibly powerful, incredibly cool, and virtually nobody does it. I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of assignments I've ever marked where a student has cited the explanatory memorandum, and I'm pretty sure I would have given an HD to pretty much all of those assignments. Okay, this is an incredibly powerful document. Nobody uses it because nobody can find it, but you can. Let's jump on the Queensland Parliament website, parliament.qld.gov.au. Now, they pretty much do the same thing. So if you scroll down to, sorry, you don't need to scroll down at all. You can go through work of the Parliament above, but the quickest way to find it is you go right down to the bottom where it says work of the Assembly. You can see bunches of stuff that's available. You go bills and legislation. You can look at bills that are currently before the House, bills that have been introduced into this Parliament, even if they're not currently before the House, and bills from previous parliaments. Now, the previous parliaments only goes back as far as 1996, but most of the time that's going to be more than enough for what you need. Let's stick with the current parliament for the moment. What you can see, every single piece of legislation that is currently before the Queensland Parliament is there. We'll stick with our environmental theme. We've got here the Environment Protection Chain of Responsibility Amendment Bill. Now, this tells us that that was passed, okay? It was passed in April of this year. So we want to know what it was all about. Well, we've got two options over here. We can open up the explanatory note. The explanatory note in Queensland is exactly the same as the explanatory memorandum in the Commonwealth. Tells you, look, policy objectives and the reasons for them. You couldn't get any plainer English than that. It says this is why we've passed this act. This is the achievement. This is how the act is going to work. This is what we could have done. This is how much it's going to cost. Okay, you can see that we go down a bit further and it says these are the actual sections of this act. This is what Clause 3 does. It amends Section 215 to allow this to happen. Much, much easier than trying to read the actual piece of legislation. I would go so far as to say that if you're looking at a piece of legislation and you don't go looking for the explanatory memorandum, you're nuts, because it's really going to help. Let's go back now. You'll see this other thing here called the explanatory speech. The explanatory speech is the speech that gets made by the minister when the minister is tabling the bill in Parliament. Why is that important? Well, it gives us the context for what the government was trying to do when they introduced the legislation. It also puts much more of a political context, because the minister who's bringing the legislation in, the minister's a politician, they're from a particular political party, they've got a particular political agenda, and it's very important to understand that if you're trying to understand what the legislation actually means. Those of you who think back to your statutory interpretation training will know that in court it is perfectly okay to refer to that explanatory speech when you're trying to say to the court, this is the purpose of the legislation, and therefore this is how you should interpret the legislation. So that's all the free sites that we're going to have a look at. Now I want to look at some of the databases, or one in particular that's available to us, to each of you through your CQ Uni Library account. Now, if you just do a Google search on CQU library databases, it'll bring you to Google will deliver you to a screen like this, databases A to Z, and we're going to go after L. The first database I want to introduce you to tonight is this one here called LexisNexis. LexisNexis AU. You'll see that there's two there. Let's go back for a second. You'll see there's two there. There's Lexis.com and LexisNexis AU. Don't get them confused. We'll have a look at this one later, but for the moment, go for LexisNexis AU. It'll log you in, and you come to a screen that looks like this. For the moment, there's two areas that we want to have a look at. The first one is what we call Australian Current Law Reporter. Now, what this does is, as legislation is passed and as key cases are passed, key judgments handed down, they're all collected. So we can go down here and essentially pick our area. Okay, environment doesn't come up, which means that so far there hasn't been anything significant. So what we're going to do instead, just at random, let's pick medicine. Opening up medicine, there's been changes to the law in Queensland. And here's a significant case. So what this means is that if you're trying to find out whether there has been any developments in the law, usually in the last few months, then you're going to be able to look at that database to find that out. I've got to tell you, most of the time, for most students, you're not going to need to do that, because most of the time you're going to be able to accomplish the same thing by using AustLII, which is always updated for statutory changes, and AustLII's Note Up feature, which will get you to those cases. But know that this tool is there. The more important tool that I want you to know about on LexisNexis is this bottom one, Statutes, Annotations, Federal. If we jump into that, we then open up annotations down the tree. We'll open up E for environment, keep tracking down, and eventually we get here to the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999. We open that up. And what we want to go and look at is, where are we here? There we are. We want to go to amended sections and annotations. We'll open this up and your world will change, because you can pick any section and it will tell you for every section that has had any amendment or any case law, it will tell you what happened. Okay, so we've got this section 170 capital C, which is about part of the administrative processes for obtaining environmental approval for major projects. And what this tells us is that this particular section was tried in a case called Wilderness Society and Turnbull. Okay, Turnbull at the time having been the current Prime Minister. It tells us what actually happened in that case in one paragraph or less, and then gives us the full citations for that case. And depending on your luck, you may be able to click through. I don't think we'll be able to click through on this one. No, we can't. But having the citation, we can then jump into AustLII and pull open that case. Okay, so what this means is that you get the opportunity, once you've got a section that you're looking at, if it's a federal section, you can jump onto this database, find that section, and it will tell you not only whether there's been any amendments or what the cases are that have interpreted the section, it'll give you a short summary of what they mean, and it'll give you their case citation. So you can see that by doing all of these things, you take the statute and you're actually building onto that a whole bunch of other sources of information. Now, when you think about all of the extra bits that we've looked at in the last half hour. When you think about noting up, you think about the regulations and determinations, you think about the explanatory memorandum or statement, you think about the second reading speech by the minister, the parliamentary speech by the minister, you think about the annotations that are available here, you think about the material that you can get through the Australian Current Law database that we looked at a few moments ago, and you must suddenly realise that if all you do is have a look at the actual piece of legislation and try and go off that section, then you're looking at a tiny little slice of the information that's available to you about that statute. Now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and I'm going to open up chats and provide an opportunity for anyone who wants to jump in and ask questions. Before I do, though, I'll just note the comment that Petros has made there. G'day, Petros. The digitally signed versions of what Petros has said is that digitally signed versions of OSLI reports and statute are suitable for handing up in court. That's not the case for all courts. There are some courts that will let you do that, and there are some courts that won't. And there are some judges who will frown upon being handed up materials from OSLI. So, given that the two legislation websites are there and they're free and they'll let you download stuff, then that's not hard to do. Now, Kayla says confused as to where you find the second and third readings. Kayla, do you want to unmute and just tell us what exactly you're looking for? Are you looking for the second and third reading prints of the bills, or are you looking for speeches?
I'm just, with our statutory interpretation assessment this term, we've got to find our second readings. However, in all of the acts I've been looking for, I can find the explanatory memorandums, but I can't find any speeches, like any readings for second reading.
Okay, are we talking about Commonwealth legislation, or are we talking about state legislation?
The one that I have at the moment, I believe, is a Commonwealth legislation.
Okay, which act are we talking about?
It is, that's asking me a question now, the Exhibited Animals Act 2015.
Sorry, the which Animals Act?
Exhibited?
Exhibited?
Yeah.
All right. Exhibited Animals Act 2015.
Yes, I believe it's a Commonwealth one.
Yeah, I've got Wayne here next to me. Am I going to ruin your assignment if I show them how to find this one?
No, not at all.
No? All right. What I'm going to do...
Actually, looks like it's actually a Queensland Act, actually.
Oh, it's a Queensland Act?
Yeah.
Fine. All right. So I'm going to share the screen again and show you how to do this.
Thank you.
If I can make this computer cooperate. There we go. Share screen. Okay, now you guys should be able to see the screen there. Now, obviously, if we're looking for a second reading speech, we're looking in Queensland legislation, and we're going to the Queensland Parliament because that's where the speech will have been. Now, it's a 2015 Act, so let's start at the start. We're starting at the home page. We'll scroll down to the bottom and go to Bills and Legislation. Now, we all know that the current Parliament started on the 31st of January 2015, or the election was on the 31st of January 2015, so we're pretty likely to be looking for a bill before this Parliament. So we can scroll down then. At the moment we're looking at the 2016 bills, but here we are, the 2015 bills. We'll go down to E for Exhibited, and there we are, the Exhibited Animals Bill 2015. The explanatory speech, which is just another word for the second reading speech, is right there. We download that, open it up, and this tells us that the second reading speech was delivered by Minister Byrne, but more importantly, it tells us that it was introduced on the 27th of March 2015 and that this speech is on page 237 of Hansard. So if you wanted to go and do a Hansard search, which I'll show you in just a second, you can do that. Now, let's look at what's actually happened here. It's been introduced it's been introduced by the Minister. It's been read a first time, and then it's been referred off to the Agricultural and Environment Committee. So what that means is that any further discussion or debate on this bill would have happened at a later time. Okay, but that introductory speech in the Commonwealth, that introductory speech would be given on the second reading, and so that's why people still commonly refer to them as a second reading speech. So that's the material that you're looking for right there, Carl. Now, we've got Greg saying explanatory memoranda is not found in the legislation website for Queensland, but in the Parliament website. Look, that's a good question as to why the explanatory memoranda are not tied to the legislation website. I think they should be. I don't know why they're not, but it's not actually that much extra difficulty to jump onto the Parliament website. And these are like any other websites. I mean, the more you practice with them, the more that you tool around on them, the easier it becomes to find things on them. So personally, I think they should, but maybe it's just a matter of resources that they know these things are already freely available. So they're not going to chuck them up there. It may also be a separation of powers thing, because the legislation website is run by the Attorney General's Department, so it's an executive government function, whereas the parliamentary activities are run within the legislative function. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cease the recording in a moment, and then I'm going to have a very brief mouthful of water and reset the Firefox so that everything is ready for us to look at case law. I've got one last question that I'll answer before I do that, and that was from Jacob, who says, are cabinet submissions available to read? The answer to that is sort of. Cabinet submissions are available to read, but they are kept secret for 30 years after the cabinet meeting. So if you're looking for cabinet submissions from before 1986, then you're in luck. But if you're looking for cabinet submissions from anything later than the last couple of years of the Bjelke-Petersen government, then you're going to have to wait a while. And if you're looking for current cabinet submissions, then you're going to have to wait until I'm a very old man indeed. The reason they do this is that cabinet proceedings are confidential, so that cabinet ministers can go into cabinet, they can argue their heart out, but they can still then come out of cabinet as a collective with collective responsibility, and so they can come out and support something publicly that they actually opposed in cabinet, so that they basically say, I'm going to go into cabinet, I'm going to have my say, I'm going to fight it out, but if I lose, then I'm going to come out of cabinet and agree with the rest of the government. That's a very old Westminster tradition. Lois has asked about the New South Wales website and the second reading speeches. I'm not that familiar with the New South Wales Parliament website, but it's pretty good, and I'm sure that you could find that material there. If you want to email me in the next couple of days at anthony.marinac@gmail.com, then I'll jump onto the New South Wales Parliament website and try and find it, but I'm pretty sure it's there. All right, so recording's going off. I'm going to put Wayne back in the chair for just a minute, and I'll be back in about 3 minutes' time.